This is Rob Anspach, and welcome back to another edition of E-Heroes. This is episode 252 for anyone keeping count, and we're going to talk about moments that rock. Now, you're probably wondering why moments that rock, but as you know, and I've talked about this on many episodes, you as an entrepreneur need to be an awesome storyteller. Storytelling is by far the fastest way to get people interested in who you are, trust you, and so I brought on one of the foremost promoters of the music industry of all time, Tony Michaelides, and he's going to share with you some of rock industry's best stories. So thanks, Tony. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Rob. It's funny, my usual first way of coming in is pronouncing my name properly, but you got it spot on. It would be you. Oh, it's Michaelides, actually. Next question.
Yeah, I've had my name butchered so many times. I just go with it. But you know, we can talk about a lot of the big bands that you work with, and some of them are my favorite. I mean, Peter Gabriel, U2, The Police, Tom Petty, Genesis, even Matchbox 20. Although my favorites are bands from the 80s. That's just the generation I grew up in, and that's the music that defined me. Granted, the 90s, I can't remember any bands out of the 90s. So it's like, but how did you even get started?
How did I get started? Well, it's funny because obviously you've got a lot of entrepreneurs tuning in, and I don't think innovative. I mean, if you look at business schools nowadays, innovative management and innovation, all those things are kind of buzz topics, But I mean, those words probably weren't in the dictionary back in my day. Mm-hmm. But it was really funny because it wasn't that I wasn't ambitious, but they had a thing in the UK called further education, mm-hmm. which was perfect for people like me who were done with school but not quite ready for work. So I did a course in business studies, which is probably my least skilled asset, put it that way. But it was 70% girls and 30% guys in the college. So it was pretty fun. And I became social secretary. So I was able to book all the bands. So I had all the tickets for all the gigs. And then when it came time to leave, I got a job. I got a job because I needed money to buy records and go to gigs. Mm-hmm. I didn't need a job that was kind of a career as such, because I didn't think that way because of the time I grew up. And, call it whatever you want, And I look at the entrepreneurial things that I managed. I mean, for instance, like when I started up my own PR company, actually, I'll do this in the way you asked it. How did I get a job in the music business? Yeah. So I picked up a paper going home from this crappy job that I had. I mean, I would come in every day. The guy next to me would be counting the hours till it was time to go in the pub on a Friday night. From like 9 o'clock on a Monday morning, only 4 days to go, stuff like that. And there was nothing that inspired me. The boss would come in, he'd send his secretary out to buy flowers for the wife for the anniversary and things like that, So there was nothing that made me want to be him, if you see what I mean. And I went out for lunch one day and I picked up a copy of the local paper, the Manchester Evening News, and I saw a job for a sales rep. And normally I wouldn't buy the paper, and if I bought the paper, I'd buy it to see what gigs were happening and what reviews of acts and stuff. But I happened to go to the classified section, and then I keep saying to myself, I didn't really think about it, but that's rubbish. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I went to bed thinking about it. I woke up thinking about it. The following morning, I went to the local HMV store, and I was rifling through the racks, and I noticed that it was a folk and jazz label, which I had nothing. No, none of those records in my collection. I was buying Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd back in then. We're talking about, early 70s. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't qualified in any way, but I got to know through working with the dealers and the record shops that, Miles Davis, Love Supreme, and McCoy Tyner and Wayne Shorter, these were iconic artists, So I got to realize by the amount of stuff that they sold. But do you know what, Rob? I went out every single day to prove to that guy. I was getting £25 a week, probably about $35, whatever. And I went to prove to the guy that gave me that job, it was the best decision he ever made, giving me that job. So I was working 200 miles from the nerve centre, like London. But I wasn't ducking and diving and pretending to do like 8-hour days. I was working my ass off, and I just loved it. Mm-hmm. And But I also was thinking, you know what? When I applied for it, I don't have a job in the music business. If I don't get it, I still don't have a job in the music business. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. And I think that taught me a lot, because the interesting thing was, as you know, I put my own book out a year ago, my second book, and I've been doing a lot of podcast interviews like this, you know, promoting myself rather than bringing people onto my own podcast. And I had a guy in, probably about a year ago, actually, strange enough, from my hometown, and he said to me, "There's a story in my book about meeting Led Zeppelin when I was 15, going backstage, and it made me understand what it was like to meet your heroes, And it's funny because when I was reciting that in the book, because there's nothing like music to take you back to a time and a place, so I'm writing that up. I was taken right back to that dressing room in 1969, and I could see Jimmy Page talking to Robert Plant, and things like that. But the thing is, he asked me this question, the guy that was interviewing me. He said, "What do you think the music industry taught you, Tony? What do you think the music industry taught you that would have helped you meeting Led Zeppelin as a 15-year-old?" And I thought, well, that's a good question. I mean, it's better than what's David Bowie like, and stuff like that. So I said, well, to be honest, not as much as you think. He said, "What do you mean?" I said, well, when I was 6 or 7 and I was on the school playground, I realised I didn't want to hang out with this jerk who was a bully, And when I was in my teens and discovering girls, and I had to stand in front of them. I mean, before we started recording, we were talking about social media. There was no stuff like that.
Yeah.
I had to stand in front of a girl and ask her out and fear rejection and think, oh my God, if she says no, will she ever ask me out again? So what I'm trying to say is, I had no idea I was going to work in an industry that, communications help.
Mm-hmm.
And my communication skills, I was like the boxer in the ghetto. I came from a generation of people who made it up as we went along. There were no music schools, not that I would want to go to one personally. So I learned my trade on the street, building relationships, like in any career you have to. And I feel that those things, when I was at school, I was doing like Latin and stuff like, dead-handed that in my career. Yeah. But they don't teach you communication and interpersonal skills at school. You have to kind of learn it. So by the time I was like 20 and meeting record dealers who turned me on to bands I never heard and stuff, and engaging in a dialogue. And then come 1978, I got offered a job in promotions at Island Records, which was kind of like my all-time favorite record label. But the bizarre thing was, I was thinking, I'm enjoying working in sales. I'm not sure I want to go and talk to DJs and be a sycophant and laugh at their jokes just to get my records played. It's very naive, Mm-hmm. And the rest is history, in as much as I really loved it. But I got offered a job at my all-time favorite record label, because I'd been buying those records in the 60s. And now I was getting paid and getting all the records for free. So I was buying Traffic in the 60s, and I was working with Steve Winwood. I watched David Bowie split up the Spiders from Mars in front of me. And then all of a sudden, I'm out on the road as his publicist, arranging all his radio and TV. And I'm thinking, that doesn't happen to a kid from the north of England. But my job was an extension of a hobby. I got to work with people whose records I bought as a kid. That doesn't happen to a kid from Manchester. But you know what? I don't think it's until the roller coaster ends that you really start to appreciate it. I look at the relationships. It's incredibly flattering, because when you're getting people's records played, it's very easy to have your calls taken. But when you're no use to anybody, like now, when I'm here, and they still pick your phone up after 30 minutes, "Oh, how are you?" And I get to do these things and interact with them and hear their stories and things. It's incredibly flattering. And I think the thing is that, for instance, what's more entrepreneurial than emigrating? Right. Most people don't do it. And if you do it, you only really do it once. But, when the music industry, when the millennium was coming, and the music industry was kind of falling apart around me, and I hadn't done anything wrong. Mm-hmm. But I had a contract with BMG for about 8 years. And that was helping pay for my 8 staff and my 4 company cars. And, your photocopies were like $50 a quarter to rent. And now, 150, sorry. Now the kind of things you can buy off Amazon for $30. Yeah. So it was an expensive operation, but it was really funny, because I kind of did my Ziggy Stardust, which is like, I came to reinvent myself. When Bowie was done with Ziggy Stardust, mm-hmm. He dropped it and moved on to the next thing. And you think, I go back to those days, think, you can't do this. Where am I going to get my next David Bowie record? Mm-hmm. But at the same time, he became that alter ego. Not that I became Ziggy Stardust, but he's a heroin addict. And all those people like Brian Jones, Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison that were dead at 27, he wasn't, because he was smart enough to nip that in the bud. So, not that I learned about drug addiction and stuff like that through Bowie, but they become like major figures of my life when I look back on the certain things that they did. And one thing I would mention is, well, two things actually, is that when I started my own promotion company, like I say, I had no experience in business. I never employed anybody that worked for a record company. Mm-hmm. There was there were DJs out here in the UK, not here when I was in the UK, Mark and Lard. Well, Lard used to work for me and Radcliffe used to live with me. So I that's how I connected them. I had 3 people start their own promotion companies, and my intern went up to manage Coldplay. Mm-hmm. So none of those people had ever worked for a record company. But subliminally, I was on that end thinking, this is this guy giving me a job with no experience. And I was that person then. So all those things, I think, had a major effect on me in doing they call it like entrepreneur now. I call it flying by the seat of my pants, I've never known one day to the next what I'm doing. And I love it. It's really weird. I don't, if you're okay with a 9 to 5, that's fine. But it would never have worked for me. So I kind of, and some of the things that happened were complete disasters. Somebody overdosed on national TV, and oh, don't worry, we'll make it work. We'll get somebody else in and stuff. So I learned a lot of, a lot of things. But I'm rambling.
No, it's and the thing is that I have to applaud everyone who came out of the 70s and 80s as promoters, because they didn't have social media. They didn't have computers. They didn't even have cell phones. And
didn't even have remote.
Right. and here they're promoting some of the greatest, bands of history. And we all have, I think every single one of us has heard David Bowie or Genesis or all these songs. And here you were in the background helping them get even bigger. And like you said, you had to evolve and change and become different, just like Bowie did with Ziggy Stardust.
Yeah. But the one thing, Rob, is, and I've said this to many people, is the easiest artists, the biggest artists are invariably the easiest to work with, because they know it's not all about them. They know it's around having a team of people around them. So you take an artist like Bowie. I mean, like I say, with doing, podcasts and stuff, I can't help talking about him, because I just think he's no longer here. And the likes of, I almost feel like I'm on a mission to help keep the legacy alive of some of the greatest artists that ever lived. So to have the opportunity to talk to your audience who have no clue who I am, and kind of share a little bit of the insider secrets around people like Bowie. His graciousness, his humility, he treats everybody the same. He's not like on his pedestal and it's like, get where you belong and do what you're told type thing. There's none of that, and it was the thrill of a lifetime. I mean, even now it's almost better. And it was like nearly 30 years ago.
Yeah. Growing up, my favorite band was Queen. And in 1991, when Freddie Mercury died, I thought, wow, the rock industry is going to really suffer. And it did for a short bit. But Brian May and the crew, trudged along and they reinvented themselves. They had to.
Yeah.
They're still playing some of their greatest rock songs. But they got a new lead singer, and he's people are reawakening to the songs of Queen, and I think they all have to do it. I mean, they all can't live forever, although I think the Rolling Stones are all 100 years old now. But
I think Keith Richards died about 42 years ago, but he's alive because he moves around a lot.
Yeah. So.
But, yeah. Sorry, go on.
But there are so many stories to be told. And I know that, you have tried over the years to be instrumental in getting those stories out there, because, I think some of us have put some of these rock stars up on pedestals.
Yeah.
when they don't need to be there. They're just regular people trying to do a job, trying to entertain people. And just like I put out my books, they're very sarcastic, but my whole goal in life is to entertain people. It's not always about the money. It's I keep putting them out because I want more people to appreciate that sarcasm. Where these rock stars, people treat them as gods, but they're not. They're just regular people who just want to entertain you.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. People don't really understand that, and unfortunately, because they have like an access all areas pass, literally, it's that thing where you have to take that away if you're the rock star and
Yeah.
control your own life, because you can become egotistical, you can become a pain in the ass. And trust me, I've seen plenty of them that are like, but to my credit, one of the worst experiences I ever had. I mean, I don't make a point of mentioning the particular band because it doesn't really matter. Nobody will ever heard of them anyway. But they were kind of, I was given the runaround because I was working at the record company. I was a free dinner and I was free drinks. And, took the guy to a shoe shop. He wanted shoes, but not only wanted a pair of shoes, he wanted me to give the girl behind the counter his room number. And I remember one day having had enough, and it was my first band I ever worked with. And, I almost could have jeopardized my job, but I just walked up to him in true Mancunian fashion, right in his face. I said, "You have turned into a complete asshole. As of now, I'll be treating you like one." And he changed like that, I wasn't putting up with it anymore. And because if you're given the runaround and stuff, then it's not about you. It's about you're not helping them. You have to keep them in order. And managing egos is incredibly important part of the job, because there's the other extreme where you're out on the road with the band, you get to know them, and then all of a sudden maybe the singer, the guitar player, he's a little not himself, and instead of getting like pissed off with them and and say, "What's your problem?" and all that and everything, sometimes it's an arm around the shoulder and saying, "Are you okay?" Because you've got to think he might have played to 20,000 people and been adored by fans, but his wife might have had a kid, and he'd rather be at home having a pizza and watching a movie than playing to 20,000 fans. So there's that, because the price of success is you don't have a 9 to 5 because you're actually with your working partners longer than you are with your spouse. Yeah. And it's very tough because it's on and off an airplanes. People only see like the glamorous side of it, but I remember working with U2 right from day one, and in the early days of trying to create some awareness, you'd get them wherever you could because they weren't getting daytime airplay. You'd take them into a tiny radio station where they'd do an interview that went out like at midnight on a Tuesday or something, and you'd build some visibility. But that involved them getting in your car and driving 3 hours to another interview to do it again, home, then have me get them up again. And don't forget, if you look at somebody like Bono now, his visibility is enormous. But could you imagine? When they played in the early days, they would come out and meet every single person that wanted to meet them and sign anything, and then get in the van with the equipment in the back with the tour manager driving, drive 4 hours in the pouring rain to get 3 hours sleep, maybe all in one room or two rooms if they were lucky, and then have it to do it all over again. Could you imagine Bono going back to a motel and getting on social media?
Yeah.
And then making all these friends, and then going to bed and waking up, and all of a sudden he's got 100 fans in Japan. "Hey, I met this guy. You got to, blah blah blah." There was none of that. Yeah. It is a completely changed beast now.
And I look at the industry now and I'm thinking, wow, yes, we have more ways to promote yourself, but I think also social media, YouTube, podcasts have kind of diluted how bands promote themselves, because now they have all this ways. However, if they went back to the old school way of doing it back how you described, that's the early ways of going viral. Now it's like you go viral and nobody cares.
No, they don't. And something that I learned the other week was there are 100,000 songs a day that get uploaded to Spotify. Yeah. There's probably 95,000 of them are useless. Because the other thing is, it's funny because I can't sing and I can't play, but I could make a record. But I could make a record with computers and technology, But I couldn't go play for my favorite football team if I didn't have talent, So there's no kind of screening process. It's like, if your parents are rich and they can afford to have somebody work with you, make a record and make your voice sound like this and that, and turn you into a star because they're your mother and father. But it's not. It's not real. I mean, my experiences, and not just working as long as I did in the industry, but understanding how the Led Zeppelins or the Pink Floyds made it by just going and playing every shithole up and down the country.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I saw you two play to 11 people in a pub, and 4 of those people came with me, and they went out and played like they were playing to a stadium. There was no cynical, and why are we doing this? Blah blah. And then they get in the van together again, go down for the next gig and stuff like that. And it's, for me, I just call it paying your dues. I mean, if you work your way up in a corporate ladder, you should start at the bottom,
right?
Because then you can look and appreciate what the people at the bottom are having to put up with, and work with them to create the greatness in them. Our mutual friend who introduced us, Sean, we're doing a project, Ingredients of Greatness, where we're offering training and stuff like that, and to people who can see it from a different perspective, like people that they would otherwise not understand why. I mean, you can look at like Jeff Bezos and people like that and understand that they're megastars in their industry, but you don't know anything about the music industry people and the struggles and the trials and tribulations that they go through, and you begin to understand what separates them from others. You mentioned Peter Gabriel before. Now, I know you mentioned you were. I'll tell you the story about that quickly, but I never grew up on that English art school stuff. I was never into ALP, Genesis, Emerson, Lake and Palmer. All those bands, The Nice and things. It began and ended with Bowie. It began and ended with Bowie, but that's personal taste. I was growing my hair. I was into what they call progressive rock. But the thing is, it was. Oh, hang on! I got a senior moment here. What was
I'm getting those, and I'm in my 50s.
Oh yeah, well, I just turned 70. It doesn't. I'm not sticking up for the age now, but it's kind of become very real.
And so this is the key reason why we want to share these stories, because as we age out, we start to forget. So I think the more we start to tell people all these things that we did early on in our careers, it's going to help the next generation.
I can't take any of the credit for this. I mean, for instance, again, going back to Sean, I've known him for like 12 years and we've talked about stuff and things, and he's a music fan and stuff like that. And he appreciated that we have something to offer. So all of a sudden I can take what I learned at my school, the School of Rock, not the literal School of Rock,
right,
but real world education, and actually inspire people into, I mean, it's funny, I write my own quotes, and here's a classic one. It's like, I'm blessed to have the stories, but cursed that I have to remember them.
Right.
But I think the thing is, and I feel that, because I want to take my message into corporate America, the project we're doing, the Ingredients of Greatness and all that type of stuff, to people out there, so they have accessibility to find the inner secrets of greatness, that they otherwise wouldn't read. Because a lot of books that you read about rock and roll, for want of a better word, it's just the sex, drugs, and rock and roll side of it, and that's boring, because that's not a story. That's just like it can happen anywhere. You can have abuse of any industry. But I do feel that like, certainly now that I look back on the things that I was fortunate enough to experience, I know what I was telling you about, Genesis. So the funny thing was, when I started, I'd been working for Ireland for 4 years, 78 to 80. And then they had financial problems. There were 5 of us on the road doing radio, TV, and regional press, and we all got laid off. And I got a job 20 minutes later, working with Charisma, which was Genesis and Peter Gabriel. And obligation, I had to go to the gigs. It was the Genesis Duke album and Peter Gabriel Games Without Frontiers Biko period. So I pick up the Peter Gabriel album. And Peter Gabriel, to me, and I know you're a Genesis fan, so spare me, right, was like these English public school boys, with like this lead singer with a flower pot in his head. It was a little weird, because I was into, like, my hair was here and I was into Led Zeppelin. And then, like, I pick up the album and I'm reading, like, the lyrics to Games Without Frontiers. Hans plays with Lottie, Lottie plays with Jane, Jane plays with Willie, Willie's happy again. Oh, that sounds like him. So I go to the gig. Oh, my God. He's become one of my favourite artists of all time. Absolute genius. But the other thing is, and he's just released a new record now, never the pressure from the record company to put something new out so they could rub their hands and think they can make some money.
Mhm.
All his, like, giving back with all the stuff that he does, his real world studios and absolutely. And do you know what? The nicest man you would ever want to meet.
I
And
think
people would put up with him if he was horrible.
I think Salisbury Hill is one of his best songs, personally.
Salisbury it is, but you know, it's a classic.
Yeah.
You see, songs like that stand the test of time. I remember, you know, the interesting thing is you look at artists nowadays like Adele and Ed Sheeran. They sell more records than the rest of them put together, really.
Yeah.
But they look so plain. I mean, Simon Cowell never signed Adele, but you're a bit fat, you're a bit sassy, you not need to swear, you stop smoking, and manufacture them into something they can market and promote. She just goes out, and you can't fool the public, and everybody buys her records.
Yeah.
And I think that's fantastic because it's very inspiring to other people. But I do think that you know you shouldn't kind of, you know, manufacture somebody who has. There's a reason you got interested in them, not to turn them into what you like, but to make sure that the public can actually, you know, be affected by this into the fact that they go out and buy. But, you know, like nowadays, I mean, we were talking before about, you know, social media and things. I mean, can you imagine trying to explain to somebody that you have to get up off your chair and turn a record over to listen to side two? I mean, we had 3 channels, you know, it was like without a remote, you had to get up and press a button on the TV.
I try to explain to my kids what 8-tracks were, and they're like, "What are you talking about?" And then I go, "Cassettes," and they're like, "What?" I'm like, "CDs," and they're like, "Still don't get you, Dad. What are you talking about?"
Yeah, yeah.
Really?
I think I think the thing is that the unfortunate thing of it is any industry that can create a lot of with success, wealth comes, you know, attracts, you know, a lot of the wrong type of people. There's not just the music industry, a lot of things. And I think the thing is, it's always been pretty much for me driven by greed, you know. It took them 40 years to realise they wouldn't be a band as big as the Beatles again, you know, and stuff like that. And the formats kind of saved them. When CD came out, they went to the artist and got to take a reduced royalty. Well, what's the biggest expense in making a record? Recording. These records have already been made. So they were rubbing their hands and re-promoting these things and taking a big cut, like 4 times what the artist was getting and things. And then, you know, and when Napster came along, I mean, listen, I've got first-hand information on that. That's why I'm here. The music industry was falling apart around me, and I hadn't done anything wrong, but it was affecting my life and my career. I was turning 50. Well, what are you going to do? Go to the job centre? What have you done? I don't know what we're going to do with him. You know, they can't find me a job. You know, I have to find my own. So I think that, you know, what, you know, like I say, it's, you don't learn to drive a car until you've passed your test, you know. And I think with what I did, you don't learn anything until you're out there. And there are things that get cocked up and stuff that's out of your control, but you have to deal with situations. You have to deal with people. You have to work with people you want to work with and adapt to working with people you have to work with. So with your area of expertise and your entrepreneurial thing, all these things that I'm saying kind of fit into that as well. It's not just about famous people, but you know, I find that people listen to stories about famous people differently because it takes them back to a time and a place. And you know, for me to have the opportunity to go out, yes, we all need to pay the rent and put food on the table, you know. But the thing is, there are stories that I have that I don't want to take to the grave. I want to share with people, you know, and also just seeing how they react to it. People coming and asking questions and this and that. Because I remember I had a book publisher in New York I was talking to a while back, and he sent me a course on a bunch of things that, you know, benefit from writing a book. And one of them was you don't have to be a great writer. I don't subscribe to things like that. I think you should be able to spell and be a little articulate, to, you know. But one of the things that I found incredibly powerful was people like to live vicariously through them. And it really hit home with me because I'll be perfectly blunt about this. I'm a much better version of myself now, age 70, than I was 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I'm growing up, you know, and I think like now that I remember somebody saying to me about 10 years ago, and it just went in one ear and out the other. He said, "You're the closest they get to Bowie and Bonner." And that just translates as people like to live vicariously through.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had first-hand experience of that in as much as, you know, friends who've managed to, you know, to share, you know, stuff that I've told them with people. And you know, like I have a friend at McCann, you know, they bought loads of my first book and stuff. And then people coming up to him and saying, like, "How do you know this guy? How do you know this guy?" I mean, I don't need the adulation, but it's interesting because I need to turn up.
Mm-hmm.
And we were having a conversation probably during the course of this, but at the beginning as well, as I I'm not telling people to buy my book. I'm just turning up and letting them know I've got a book out, like you were saying,
Mm-hmm.
you know, with what you do and stuff. And I think it's really important for your visibility. And like I have to kind of if I was employed to promote me, the easiest way to endorse that would be I'd have been sacked by now.
Mm-hmm.
Because I would have been no good at it. But then again, somebody said to me, "Well, that's why, like, you know, artists get other people to represent them because they're not very good at it. They just, you know, they're better at their art." Well, I'm not
Mm-hmm.
going to go off here and make a record. You know, I have to do other things. But I'm really invigorated and excited by it all because it's a new challenge for me. And having never had a 9 to 5 or never had you know, like for instance, when I was growing up. Obviously, I've got a few years on you, but when I was growing up, I mean, if you went to work at the bank as a cashier, you would probably grow to become like the regional manager in
Mm-hmm.
time, and you were probably 30, 40 years in a career, you know. Well, you don't really have that in the music industry anyway. But I do think that you know, because I wasn't used to that like 9 to 5 things, I was more adventurous in a way to take chances and things. Because I remember this vividly when I got offered a job at A&M after I'd gone back to Ireland because that was the weirdo in me. When the Charisma, Peter Gabriel Genesis, and Peter Gabriel Games of that Frontiers period and Genesis Duke finished, there wasn't a great deal on the label. So I phoned Island Records up and persuaded them to give me my old job back. And I said I'd do 5 people's jobs for one person's wage, which is pretty attractive because I'd just heard U2 playing to this pub in Manchester, and I wanted to work with them. They were just about to be signed, you know. So that's what got me back in there.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that, you know, I was learning my trade when they were learning theirs. Because, you know, to go back to a label like that, and then all of a sudden, and this is again the weirdo in me, I got a call from A&M Records offering me a job. And I was fiercely loyal to the label that had already laid me off once, so I didn't want to leave. And I went down. The guy persuaded me to go down. Let's have lunch. We'll have a chat about it. And he was the guy that put the idea in my head about starting a regional promotion company. And I was the first person to do it, I think, in the UK. So I set up regionally. And then I remember vividly getting a call from him when I agreed to take the job. Because I'd gone back to Ireland and told them, listen, I want to set up independent. I'll still work for Ireland. So they were giving me a retainer and a car, and A&M were giving me a bigger retainer. And then I got Mute Records with Depeche Mode and Factory with New Order and stuff. And it kind of escalated from there. But he phoned me up, and I remember it vividly. And my little girl was 3, and she was playing the paddling pool in the garden with a friend. My wife was pregnant, again with our second kid. And he said, that's fantastic, Tony, great. When are you moving to London? I said, I'm not moving to London. He said, what do you mean? You'll have to move to London. And I said, this. I said, I don't have to do anything. He said, what do you mean? I said, why would I travel 200 miles south to travel 400 miles north to do my job? Regional promotion is in the regions. And when you think of it, I had a pregnant wife and a 3-year-old, and I was jeopardizing my career. But it didn't think like that. It was like, tell it like it is, Tone. You know, I'm not doing that. And I didn't want to move my family to a bed sit in London and be out 7 nights a week at gigs, living in a tiny, dingy little place, because that would have been all I could have afforded. But I even like with sports, I would play football and cricket, and I would go out at weekends and be in the Cheshire countryside playing like that, you know, willow against leather, you know, thing. And then I'd go into the pub, and we'd be having a few beers and telling dirty jokes and be normal. I didn't
Mhm.
want to go out and talk about what I'd done in the day or anything like that. I wanted to just, and I think of it, I almost A&R'd myself. I made what would work for me,
Mhm.
my job in life, so that I could not, you know, fall fake to all the other things that were around you. Because it, I don't know how I did it now, time wise, but you don't. You're driven by adrenaline and just
Yeah.
you love what you do.
Yeah. I spent the first probably 20 some years of my entrepreneurial career putting my business first, my family second. And the last decade, it's been reversed. I put the family first. And yeah, I've missed a lot of opportunities, but you know, everything revolves around my family. So it makes a whole different perspective. And I'm not tied to anybody. I pick up clients that fit who I want them to fit. And it makes my life easier.
But the good thing about that, Rob, is the fact that you don't change. The person they meet is the person they're either working with or collaborating with or whatever. And that consistency thing is everything. Because I used to say to record companies, I should say, listen, if you think I'm the biggest asshole you've ever met, I won't let you down. I'll be just the same next time. You know what I mean? And it sounds very bravado and everything, but it wasn't like as in your face as it sounds. It's like, listen, because like I say, with some people like to just get their feet under the door and just roll with it. And there
Yeah.
are so many people in America that have got jobs they don't enjoy, relationships they don't enjoy, but it's easier than leaving because you lose your health benefits and divorcing because you've got to pay alimony and everything. So they stick in an uncomfortable, unhappy life.
Hmm.
I don't want to do that. I want to wake up and be the person that I am. And
Hmm.
I want to surround myself with people that inspire and energize me because I'm a firm believer of, and this has been proven to me. You mentioned Matchbox 20, right?
Hmm.
I work with Matchbox 20, one of the greatest managers I've ever worked with. He lives out in the Santa Ana Mountains. I've stayed on his ranch, and the first thing I ever said to him was, Michael, if we can't get arrested with this record, you'll be the first to know. And he loved it because I wasn't going to patronize him and tell him something was happening that was not. But what he wanted to know every part of the business. And I was even learning. I was getting, I was in England then, I was getting like 8-hour time differences. I was getting phone calls at 1 in the morning, which was, I could have lived without. But the thing was, I learned so much from those people. But I also got to realize, and obviously Paul McGuinness from you too. And I was fortunate enough to have that around me. And I'm a firm believer of surrounding yourself with greatness. If I'm working with the best bands and the best managers and the best, publicists around and this and that and everything, then I'm the best I can.
Hmm.
And I think if I'm working with, it sounds pretentious, with lesser mortals who just get by, then you only have to do so much.
Hmm.
But I like being tested to just turn up and be the best version of me that I can.
Yeah.
And nobody taught me that. Life taught me that. And I find that incredibly stimulating now as a, dare I use the word, grown up, kind of looking back on what I'd learned on the road and sharing that with others. Not saying be me, but let me tell you how you asked me a question. How did it all begin?
Hmm.
I answered it. So that's what I kind of, want to do now. And I think, I really enjoy it as well because, you get to find, I can't understand anything unless I translate it into music terms.
Hmm.
So like I have my lessons learned from rock and roll brand, if you like. So I'll go out with those, but in the same way that a band goes out and plays its early gigs, and it's the whites on people's eyes that tell you what tracks should be on the album. There's people going, their mouths open, their eyes there, they're tapping their feet, they're, nodding, oh, I love this, blah, blah, blah. And that for me is you can only assume, and that's why when I'm doing, when I am doing gigs and stuff, I love the Q&A because in the same way that you said to me, I don't really sound that's great, fantastic, my type of guy. I
Oh,
don't really just
and
want to roll.
the reason I ask people how they got started because that's their origin story.
Yeah.
That is what shapes them to who they are now. And
Mm.
and I ask a lot of entrepreneurs and they don't want to tell me or they'll sidestep it because they're ashamed of something. I'm like, I don't care if you're a drug dealer or an adult TV star. I don't care any of that. That is that is the point that started you in the direction you're going now.
Yeah, yeah.
Embrace it. But
Even the other things though, Rob, I mean, even like you can't, you look at people like Richard Branson, he's had more companies fail than he's had successful, but you don't think of that. And I remember reading something about him. He said, I've never been frightened to put the Virgin name on anything as long as I thought it was worth doing. And he's had things like Virgin Brides and Virgin Litter that you've never heard about because you've heard about the airline and they had the trains in England, the label, the publishing company. You hear of the successes. He's had hundreds of disasters, but he gets up, obviously with his balloon and everything. He's an adventurous type, like a lot of these people. They go to the moon now, because they've got too much money. But at the end of the day, I think that those type of things make those people like who they are, and we're all different. I'm not, like you with what you're doing. You're sharing other people's messages with your audience. At the same time, you're getting the exposure. They're getting the knowledge. You're bringing other people in, and I bet you're learning from a bunch of people that you're bringing in.
I mean,
never stop learning. The moment you think you've got it, complacency sets in, and I would never let that happen. Even now, and I'm not defending my age or anything like this, but I ain't done yet.
Right.
I'm raring to go. I feel now, because we're moving and everything, like my first day in the music business, 20, and like, oh my God, this is great, and going for it. And like now, it's just different.
Yeah.
You embrace it.
When I started publishing books 10 years ago, I had no idea. I had no clue, zero clue. But I was so disgusted in other publishers coming to me and say, Rob, it's going to cost this much.
Oh, yeah.
We want you to change all this stuff. I'm like, no. So I put my first book out and put it under my own label. I created my own publishing company, made a lot of mistakes. But in the last 10 years, we've produced 36 books.
Wow.
And we got 4 more on the slate. And people were coming to me and said, Rob, help us with our book. Help us do this. Had I not taken that leap 10 years ago, I wouldn't be where I am now.
Yeah.
5 years ago when I started this podcast, I had no idea I'd get to 250 plus episodes, but I'm always out there asking people, do you want to be on the podcast? I see a great story in you. Would you like to share it?
Exactly. But, it's kind of, it's really interesting because like, what I said to you before about, people in record companies trying to turn them into something that they can market. That's exactly what the publishers were telling you. Write me a book I can market and promote. Right. Don't write your book. No, I'm writing my book and I'll do it. And that's exactly the same, in as much as you have to kind of believe in what you're doing. And then the others will follow, but they won't follow to become you. They'll just be inspired by the way that you've done it. And that tells the same story as me. Don't tell me to move to London. You want me? I'll do it. And until I screw up on it, I mean, because I came from an industry where, sometimes you get those safe jobs that you're just looking for an annual pay rise to take care of cost of living and things. My job was, here's a record. If you get it played, you have a job. If you don't get it played, you don't have a job. So every day, I never had a safe job. I had nothing safe surrounding me. And you create a world that you're comfortable living in. And even now, and this sounds awful, I'm moving, right? Starting again, with myself, my wife, we're totally excited and things. And there's people that have drifted out of my world that I won't miss. Right. Because when you're a parent and you run your own company, you spend a lot of time looking after other people. There comes a time in your life you think, hey, what about me? Not at the expense of others. But if I come down here, I won't be putting on Facebook and telling, we must have a beer. No, we mustn't have a beer. That was then, this is now. And it's kind of just an awakening in a way to the life that you want to live, because then I'll be better company. I'll be better professionally and personally, but I'll also be still growing because that's what experience and, and age does to you. It makes you realize the things that work. And I think that, failure and things like that. And again, going back to my lessons learned from rock and roll, the story of Live Aid, when you two didn't get to perform all the songs because Bono went on walkabout. And that was a turning point in their career. They forgot to do Pride. We were furious. It was the first time we got a serious amount of airplay on the track. And the lead singer goes a walkabout, takes a girl out of the audience and starts dancing with her. A band are up here going, where's he gone? You know. And it was like, oh my God, the manager goes off to Paris to stay with his friends, furious as him. The band wanted to sack him. And you wake up the next morning and it's like Freddie Mercury and U2 stole the show. It's like, so you talk about a mistake turning into an opportunity. They have got all the stories in the world. It doesn't mean you can go and do it that way, but it gives you the foresight and the understanding that I can take risks and I can still get up. It's the old cliches, you not I get knocked down, it's get back up again and things. But it's interesting what you said about you know, what you're doing now and stuff, because since the pandemic, two of the biggest buzz topics in business schools now are persistence and resilience. And those things where you don't give up, you just keep going away. Hey, there's a pandemic and all this domestic violence and people losing the plot. And my wife manages a bakery here, and so many people are just, there's just so much anger out there, you know. It's deal with it. You can't make it go away, but you don't have to be horrible to people because you're having a hard time or something like this. Stop, relax, think about it. Like most things, we'll ride it out. I mean, my parents went through world wars.
You can get angry at somebody, but the next day or even a few hours later, apologize, move on. I know people that carry grudges for decades. And I'm like, what good is that? What is it serving? Move on.
Well, we could talk about social media, but it's, you know, as much as good it is, there's as much bad, you know, because people, you know, they don't grow into developing interpersonal skills and stuff like this. I mean, we haven't met each other. If I talked to you tomorrow, we were like, we were having a drink last night, you know, and stuff like that. And it's easy because you just create a bond where you share things that inspired you and helped you, and you listen to what happened in other people's worlds. Yeah, I mean, there's probably not the opportunity to talk to many people that worked in the period that I did, but as a fan, you're keen to hear it, but you're also taking it in professionally because it was a job that paid the mortgage, brought my kids up, but it was a job that I enjoyed.
Yeah. So
I didn't get up on Monday thinking, oh God, Monday morning blues. And
so how do people talk to you? Where do they go? How do they book you for their podcast?
well, I've got a website, which is TonyMichaelides.com, which is, well, basically, if you Google Tony Michaelides, the two things that come up are the website, well, the three things, the website, the radio show, and the podcast. I have a radio show called The Promised Land, which is, I just play what I want on an largest independent internet station in Europe. And my podcast is with a company called Pantheon, which is the largest music-only podcast site in the world. But if you Google me, I mean, I've not got as many episodes as you. I'll be up to close on 50, but I'll keep going and stuff. And I have my book, Moments That Rock, which is available on Amazon. But if you do want, it was so funny actually. I had to work this out and put it on my website, because when I brought my book out, I had a load of people I know in the area that bought it, but they bought it on Amazon. And then they wanted it signing. So for 10 days, I drove to every Starbucks and coffee shop and McDonald's signing books that they bought on Amazon. So if they want a signed copy, it's going to cost an extra $4-5 in postage, but they can go to the website and they just have to.
I always send people to Amazon because I got tired of signing. I'm like,
oh, no.
You really want my autograph? I mean, it's gonna devalue the book.
I only have one autograph. I have David Bowie's, but began and ended with that with me. But yeah, so that's where I am now.
This was great, and I think we could probably go hours listening to great stories of
hours,
and
days,
yeah, weeks maybe. So if anybody wants to continue listening, please book Tony for your podcast, because great stories. And they apply to not only the music industry but the entrepreneurial industry, and a lot of great life lessons. So I want to thank Tony, and everybody go to his website, TonyMichaelides.com, and we'll see you guys on the next episode. Adios.